I'm Margaret Walsh, 67 years old, and this is my house. I say that first because people tend to forget whose name is written on the deed when too many bodies start filling the kitchen. I earned this place, every brick and every beam, and I intended to grow old here in peace. But peace has a way of shattering when the wrong person decides they own more than they do. That morning I was rinsing a coffee cup when Sabrina Cole, my daughter-in-law, leaned against my counter like she had signed the mortgage herself. She didn't even look up from her phone before she said the words that burned into my chest. If you don't like living with us, you're free to leave. My own house. My own kitchen. And she spoke as if I were the guest. I should have laughed. But the truth is, my hands trembled. 10 minutes later, her voice was trembling instead. She was on the phone with 911, crying that I had lost my mind. What she didn't know was that I had already begun protecting myself. 7 minutes after Sabrina's frantic call, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw 2 uniformed officers standing shoulder to shoulder with a young paramedic. Parked behind them was a sedan I didn't recognize, sleek and dark, as if it belonged to someone who preferred to enter quietly but with authority. I opened the door, steadying my voice as I greeted them. The older officer explained they had received a report of a disturbance, concerned that I might be a danger to myself or others. Before I could answer, Sabrina appeared at the top of the stairs with mascara streaked down her cheeks, thanking the officers as though they had arrived to save her life. Then the man from the sedan stepped forward. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit too perfectly to be accidental. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Pierce, a psychiatrist who claimed I was his patient. My stomach tightened. I had never laid eyes on this man in my life. The younger officer turned to me with cautious eyes. Was this true? I looked Pierce straight on, my voice calm and precise. I recited the date, the hour, even the address where we stood. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Where exactly did we meet? Doctor. I invited the officers inside, though I kept my voice even and my back straight. If they were here to judge my state of mind, I intended to give them nothing but clarity. When Dr. Alan Pierce repeated his claim that I was under his care, I stopped him cold. I told the officers I wanted everything he said documented, including his credentials. Then, without asking permission, I reached for my phone and called my attorney, Ava Reynolds. On speaker, Ava answered on the second ring. I explained, loud enough for everyone to hear, that a psychiatrist I had never met was claiming me as his patient. Ava wasted no time. While the room grew heavy with silence, I listened to the steady tapping of her keyboard. Within minutes, she announced that Alan Pierce's medical license had been suspended for misconduct tied to psychiatric holds. The words cut through the house like a blade. The younger officer's expression shifted. Even the paramedic lowered his clipboard. Sabrina tried to cover her shock with fresh tears, mumbling about confusion and stress. But the atmosphere had already turned. I no longer looked like a confused widow. Pierce looked like a liar, caught red-handed. And the officers were finally beginning to see it. That evening, after the officers finally left, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone still warm in my hand. Ava's advice was clear and simple. Document everything. Record every word. Every move. If Sabrina wanted to turn my house into a stage, then I would make sure the curtains stayed open for an audience larger than she expected. The next morning, I bought a small set of security cameras and installed them in the kitchen, the hallway, and just outside the guest room door. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious, but enough to catch what needed catching. Ava had also mailed me a pen that doubled as an audio recorder. I slipped it into my cardigan pocket, close enough to pick up every whisper and every lie. When Sabrina returned from her shift at the spa, she found me folding laundry in the living room. She tossed her purse onto my sofa and began complaining about groceries I hadn't bought. About utilities she claimed to pay but never did. I listened. Calm. While the tiny lens above the doorway blinked its red light. From that moment, the balance shifted. I was no longer a widow being cornered. I was the one setting the trap. One quiet step at a time. A week later, Ava called me into her office. And when I arrived, she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were marriage licenses, death certificates, and bank records that made my stomach turn. Before she married my son Michael, Sabrina had been married 3 times. Each time to an older man who died suddenly. A condo in Florida. An investment account in Arizona. A set of life insurance payouts all neatly tied to her name under different variations. It wasn't just history that looked suspicious. Ava pointed out transfers from my accounts in recent months. Money I had never authorized. Nearly $20,000 had vanished in quiet increments. Enough to fund a trip to Cancun. Enough to buy Michael a new gaming console and Sabrina a wardrobe of designer handbags. The pattern was too clean to be coincidence. That evening I played the documents on speaker in my living room, letting Michael hear every date and every signature. His face paled as Ava's voice listed each dead husband. Each transfer. Each indulgence Sabrina had disguised as generosity. He kept glancing at her, waiting for some denial. But she only pressed her lips together. Then she slipped and mentioned my morning coffee. And I knew we had reached the next crack in her mask. The next morning I set her up without saying a word. When Sabrina placed my mug on the counter, all sweetness in her tone, I waited until she turned her back. Then I asked why the coffee always made me feel heavy. Why I woke foggy and unable to remember signing certain papers. Her shoulders stiffened. But she tried to laugh it off. She said she'd been adding something mild. Just to help me relax. Just to help me sleep. Michael froze in the doorway. His eyes darted from me to his wife, searching for any other explanation. But the recorder in my pocket captured every word in crisp detail. I repeated her phrase slowly, just something mild, and she didn't bother to correct herself. Instead, she insisted she was doing me a favor. That I had seemed stressed about the house. I stayed calm. Years of teaching teenagers had trained me to hear lies without reacting too quickly. I let her speak. Let her admit that she'd slipped something into my daily routine. And all the while, the small pen in my pocket kept running. By the time she noticed the silence stretching around her, the damage was done. The mask had slipped completely. And the evidence was mine. 3 days later, Agent Laura Brooks came to my kitchen with a plan. The FBI would let slip, through carefully placed whispers, that I had recovered the money Sabrina had siphoned and was now looking for a safe place to invest it. If their network was still active, someone would take the bait. It didn't take long. At the grocery store, a well-dressed woman struck up a conversation about retirement funds. She handed me a card for Wealth Shield advisors, praising a man named Colin Mercer who had supposedly helped her protect her assets. Within 2 days, Mercer himself was on the phone, his voice warm and smooth, offering his services to safeguard what he called my life's work. He spoke of something he called an asset shield, a temporary transfer of my accounts into a protected holding fund. He promised it was standard, legal, and risk-free, but only if I signed a limited power of attorney so he could move funds quickly. The language was polished, his reassurance endless, but the hook was clear. I agreed to meet him, masking my suspicion with practiced gratitude. What Mercer didn't know was that this time the stage was mine, and every word he spoke would be recorded. At 3 o'clock sharp, Colin Mercer arrived at my door, briefcase in hand. Dressed like every inch of the respectable advisor he pretended to be, I welcomed him into the living room where the coffee table had been cleared. A quiet stage for what I already knew would be his performance. Hidden microphones and cameras captured every angle. Mercer laid out the documents with an efficiency that came from long practice. He explained that the first form gave him temporary authority to transfer my funds into a secure holding account. The second, he said, was a limited power of attorney that would expire once the asset shield was complete. His tone was confident, his smile almost paternal. I picked up the paper and read aloud the line that gave him full authority over both financial and medical decisions. He leaned forward smoothly, assuring me that it was only temporary. Only for my protection. I pressed him again, asking who decided when the authority ended. His answer was quick but damning. He did. I set the paper down and folded my hands. Outside, parked across the street, the fan-holding Agent Brooks waited. Mercer still believed he was in control. But the truth was the trap had already sprung. The moment Colin Mercer slid the papers toward me, the front door opened. Agent Laura Brooks stepped inside with 2 agents at her back, their badges held high. Mercer tried to collect his documents, but it was too late. He was read his rights in my living room, his polished mask cracking as the briefcase was seized. Within hours, the FBI had opened his office downtown, drilling into a locked cabinet that looked ordinary enough until the combination gave way. Inside were hard drives, bank ledgers, and files marked with the names of men and women from half a dozen states. Each folder carried the same pattern: an elderly target, a sudden medical evaluation, and a transfer of assets into accounts traced to Wealth Shield advisors. Among the files, one name leapt out at me: Harrington Senior Care Consulting. Mercer had notes linking each victim back to a physician's referral, like a steady pipeline feeding his business. The more pages the agents uncovered, the clearer it became that he wasn't acting alone. Standing in that office later, watching those files spread across a metal table, I realized we had pulled only the first thread. The scheme was far bigger than one smooth-talking advisor, and the true architect was still waiting in the shadows. The files taken from Colin Mercer's office pointed to a name I recognized only in passing, but the connection froze me where I stood. Harrington Senior Care Consulting. On the surface, it was a respected practice run by Dr. Olivia Harrington, a geriatric physician often quoted in newspapers about aging with dignity. In reality, her signature appeared on referral notes that funneled victim after victim directly into Mercer's hands. Agent Brooks laid the evidence out in front of me: medical charts, financial assessments, and even internal memos in which Harrington described certain patients as ideal candidates. My own records were there, complete with notes from a routine physical taken 18 months earlier. That was before Sabrina even entered my life. I wasn't a random target. I had been flagged long in advance. The FBI moved quickly. Dr. Harrington was arrested at her Chicago office, her staff stunned as agents carried out boxes of files. Watching the footage on the evening news, I felt the ground shift under me. This wasn't about one greedy daughter-in-law or one fraudulent advisor. It was a coordinated system, built by a woman whose medical license gave her authority and trust. The face of the operation was finally visible, and it was a face the public thought they could believe. The night after Dr. Olivia Harrington's arrest, I sat in my own living room across from Michael. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Yet the silence between us felt heavier than any courtroom. Sabrina was already in federal custody, her future sealed by charges she could no longer outrun. What remained was the damage inside these walls. Michael's eyes were red, his voice low. He admitted he had known Sabrina disrespected me but had chosen not to confront her. He said he was desperate to believe someone wanted him after losing his job, even if it meant ignoring what was plain to see. I listened, my anger still sharp, but tempered by the sight of my son finally facing the truth. I told him he would no longer live under my roof. He would find his own place, make his own way, and pay back what could be restored. The decision wasn't made from spite but from necessity. Respect was no longer negotiable. Michael nodded, shoulders slumped, and whispered that he understood. For the first time in months, I believed him. My house felt lighter that evening, as if the walls themselves recognized that the balance of power had shifted back where it belonged. By the end of the year, every thread had been tied off. Sabrina Cole faced multiple indictments, attempted poisoning, financial fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the elderly. Her polished image as a doting wife collapsed in a courtroom where every recording and bank statement was laid bare. Colin Mercer pled guilty to wire fraud and racketeering. His Wealth Shield empire dismantled in exchange for a lighter sentence. Dr. Olivia Harrington lost her license, her reputation, and her freedom when the evidence proved she had marked hundreds of seniors as viable targets. Michael was not charged, but the court ordered restitution for the money drained under his watch. He began working nights at a distribution center, paying down his share little by little. Our relationship remained strained, but for the first time he was standing without Sabrina propping him up. That, at least, was something. As for me, I stayed in my house. The deed remained in my name. And with the settlement funds recovered, I started a small foundation to help older adults fight guardianship scams. The cameras still blink quietly in the corners, reminders of how close I came to losing everything. One evening, I sat with a cup of tea, looking out at my front door. My voice was steady as I said aloud what I knew to be true. I was never anyone's victim. Justice, in my house, had the final word. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you've ever seen someone try to strip away an elder's dignity or rights, you know how important it is to fight back? Share your thoughts below. And subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of justice.